We've looked at what predicts success in complex, functional organizations. And the two biggest predictors are IQ, because IQ is general cognitive ability, and that's just how fast and well you can solve any problem that requires abstraction. And solving it faster is obviously better if it's an important problem, because it's more efficient. The other predictor is conscientiousness, not agreeableness. In fact, in the managerial domain, there's some evidence that agreeableness is negatively correlated with success.
Yeah.
And I think that's because agreeable managers get taken advantage of, they can't discipline their employees properly, and they get resentful.
They feel bad, right? Like what happens if you have to fire somebody who is having a really hard time, right? And then it's like, oh, I'll let them stay in the company.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
let your
worse than
company
that,
fail.
even I think they're prone. And I think this is the fundamental problem with agreeableness in some regard as an ethos, is you're completely susceptible to manipulation by narcissists and psychopaths. And we know this technically, we know this biologically. So imagine that you set up a game, a simulation, where everyone is cooperating. You could cheat, but everyone cooperates. Well, you can set up a pretty stable game that's composed of nothing but cooperating. But if you introduce one cheater, one shark, the cheater takes everything. And so this is a chronic problem for societies. It's like as soon as you set up cooperation as the norm, the desirable norm, the iterable norm, the sustainable norm, the productive norm, that means those who mimic cooperation, so narcissists, Machiavellians, psychopaths, who pretend to be cooperative and competent, can steal. And then you're faced with the problem of, okay, what do you do with the free riders and the crooks? And the answer is, well, you change society so that they're not victimized. It's like, you are naive beyond belief. You know, it's like, I think it was the mayor of Seattle when Antifa established its, zone of utopia downtown. It's like, well, it'd be just like the summer of love, which, by the way, ended very badly. And that was fine till the lights went off at night and the criminals came to play. And you think, well, they're just victims of an oppressive social organization. It's like, that'll be a real good thing to tell them when they break into your house. And so that sort of naivety, which is an outgrowth of a kind of immature agreeableness, is seriously not helpful when it comes to solving complex social problems. When men go bad, they often go bad by being antisocial and tyrannical. So, where there's way more antisocial men than there are antisocial women, which is why there's 20 times as many men in jail as there are women. So each gender has its own characteristic pathologies. You might say, well, if you're only going to interact with someone once, you might as well just take advantage of them and run off. That's what a psychopath does, by the way. And there is room in the environmental niche for psychopaths, but they have to keep moving around, because otherwise people figure out who they are. So they just move around, and they can take advantage of one person, maybe 5 times or 10 times or something. And then the reputation spreads and they got to get the hell out of it. So it's not a good long-term strategy. If you're preyed upon by a psychopath, which you will be to some degree at some point in your life, the psychopath, who will be narcissistic, will presume that you're stupid and that you deserve to be taken advantage of because you're naive and stupid. So it's actually a good thing that he's doing it. And his proof for, and I'm saying he because there are more male psychopaths, the proof that you're stupid and naive is that he can take advantage of it. And so, like, if you were wiser, you'd know his tricks, and then it wouldn't be morally necessary for him to show you just exactly who knows what about what. And so the psychopath will use his ability to fool you as proof of his own grandiose omnipotence, omniscience, and narcissism. And the problem with that is that you can be fooled by a psychopath, and virtually anybody can. So that Robert Hare, for example, who studied psychopaths for a long time and interviewed a lot of them, like hundreds of them, and videotaped many of the interviews, he said when he was talking to the psychopath, he always believed what they were saying. And then he'd watch the video afterwards and see where the conversation went off the rails. But, the proclivity to be polite in a conversation is very strong. And if you're polite, you don't object to the way that the person unfolds their strategy, And psychopaths are pretty good at figuring out how to manipulate, obviously, how to manipulate people. And the probability that you will be immune to that is extraordinarily low. So anyways, you got these two-bit hoods here who think they're really something. They also think they're tough and dangerous, and they're not. They're just, cowardly and corner dwellers, and they confuse their unwillingness to abide by reasonable rules as indication of their heroic courage, which is something else that low-rent hoods like to do, And it's partly because lots of people who just attend to the law do that because they're cowardly, which is a Nietzschean observation. Are you good, or are you just afraid? Let's start with afraid first, before we proceed to good. And that the reason that you follow the rules is because you're afraid of getting caught. Yeah, well, those kids, often university kids who are in like a hockey riot, and they end up breaking windows and stealing things, and they get nailed for it, and afterwards they're really blown away by their own behavior. It's like, well, they're in that camp. It's like they think they're good people, but they're not. They're just never anywhere where you could be bad. And as soon as you put them somewhere where they could be bad, it's like out it comes, just like that. And that's really worth thinking about, because most of you, many of you, but not all of you, I suspect, have never really been somewhere that you could be really bad and get away with it. And so you might think, well, you wouldn't do it, but people do it. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember. Don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits, you build those things in there, man. They're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. And then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. What are you really up to? Everyone's always wondering that, right? That's why they're watching your eyes, because your eyes point at things, and they can infer what you're interested in and then what you're up to by looking at what you look at. And that's why your eyes have whites, is so that we can see where you're pointing, because gorillas don't. And so what that means, roughly speaking, is that all of your ancestors whose eyes couldn't be reliably tracked were either killed or didn't mate. It's a big deal for us to see where people's eyes are pointed. And so we're always watching each other's eyes constantly. What are you up to? What are you up to? What are you looking at? What do you want? And I want to know, because if I know what you want, I can predict how you're going to behave. And that also means I can cooperate with you, or I can compete with you, or I can lie to you. But all the information is in the eyes. It's surrounded by the facial display, right? Because that's also an indication of motivation and emotion. And so our eyes are so good at that for you guys sitting there in the back, I can tell if you're looking at my eyes or at my chin. And the deviation in your eyes is so tiny that it's a kind of miracle that we're capable of making that perceptual observation. It's really important to us. All you do is teach them then to be timid and fearful, and the real predatory types, they're pretty much thrilled about that, because you'll also make them sheltered and naive. So that is, you make your kids courageous and you get their damn eyes open, and that's the best thing you can do to protect them against people who are truly dangerous.
Women actually don't like agreeable men that much. Now, it's tough for women, because if you have a disagreeable man, he's blunt, he's not very compassionate, he's not very polite, he's competitive. And that can degenerate into a kind of selfish meanness. And so the best personality predictor of criminal behavior is low agreeableness. And
low conscientiousness.
Well, if you add those two together, you get something approximating psychopathy. So that's someone, he doesn't care about you at all. Plus, he follows zero rules. So stay away from that guy. And it isn't just that he's misunderstood. He's a guy to stay away from. And you could add extroversion to that, then you'd get a narcissistic psychopath. And then maybe you could add emotional stability to that, and then you'd get a fearless, narcissistic, self-centered psychopath. And then you have, that's a movie psychopath, right?
Yeah. But if you up the conscientiousness, then you get a CEO. Right? Or a surgeon.
That's okay. So